Welcome back, everyone. I hope everybody had very well one-to-one meetings. Hope it was valuable and you made some new connections and friendships. So we're now here on stage to introduce our first speaker of the Congress. And personally, I'm a little bit jealous of the speaker. And it's not because of the fact that this speaker has over 15 million followers, or the fact that he is a #1 best-selling author. No, for me, and I'm only speaking personally, it's because this speaker has a recommendation of the one and only Oprah Winfrey. Ian, are you just as excited as I am?
I'm so excited. I can't wait. From what I can understand, we're going to get some insight how to get the complainers involved in working together. In this industry, everybody know we have that one exhibitor that always complains. And definitely, I think from Will's side, I think we'll get some nice insight from him.
I believe so too. Ladies and gentlemen, give him a warm welcome, Will.
Will Bowen is the founder of the Complaint-Free Movement, which has improved the lives of more than 15 million people worldwide. Will Bowen has been featured on Oprah,
and focus on what's going on good in your life.
NBC's Today Show, CBS Sunday Morning, the ABC World News Tonight, 60 Minutes, and Fox News Channel. Thousands of newspaper and magazine articles around the world have been written about Will, including People Magazine, Newsweek, Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, O Magazine, Self Magazine, and Chicken Soup for the Soul. Will Bowen is an in-demand speaker and trainer who travels the world working with top executives and their employees. Will personally presented his 6 millionth complaint-free bracelet to Dr. Maya Angelou, who provided the foreword for his book, A Complaint-Free World, How to Stop Complaining and Start Enjoying the Life You Always Wanted. That book has sold more than 4 million copies in more than 40 languages. Will Bowen is the author of 5 international best-selling books, a multi-#1 Amazon best-selling author, an award-winning speaker, the 2016 Purdue University Executive in Residence, and Will Bowen is the world authority on complaining. What causes it, why we do it, and how to get ourselves and others to stop. Please welcome to the stage, Will Bowen.
Good morning. That was underwhelming. Let's try that again. Good morning. Good morning. Awesome. It is a wonderful experience to be with you here in this wonderful space, in this wonderful place. And I'd like to start by thanking the sponsors who brought me here. Would you please give them a round of applause? So, pretty impressive video, don't you think? Now be honest, how many of you before this event never heard of me? Raise your hand high. That's okay, I haven't heard of half of you either. I never set out to be the world authority on complaining. This just came to me. I didn't create this, this created me. And it's been my good fortune to share this message around the world because it really seems to resonate with a lot of people across all industries. I loved it when he said, we all have that exhibitor who complains. Before you leave today, you're going to understand the real reason behind the complaints you hear. And more importantly, you're going to understand how to turn those complainers into collaborators. Does that sound good? Say yes. Good. Get used to this. Wonderful. In 2006, I was living in Kansas City, Missouri, and I was teaching a class on prosperity. And I asked the people in the class, how many of you want to be more prosperous? So let me ask you, how many of you want to be more prosperous? Raise your hand. Of course we do. That's a normal human desire. So I asked these people, how many of you want to be more prosperous? And they all said yes. Now, in 2006, we were living in the healthiest, wealthiest time in human history. This was pre-pandemic. This was pre-housing crisis. So these people were ostensibly, as far as the human species, already at the epitome of prosperity, and yet when you asked them what they wanted more, which is fine. The challenge is, I noticed that these people complained incessantly about what they already have. And as Wayne Dyer put it so well, if you're unhappy with what you have, why would you want more? It makes absolutely no sense. So my idea was to help these people appreciate what they have before I taught them how to get more. Because if you don't appreciate it and you don't enjoy it, then you're like an empty cup that's never going to get filled up. The opposite of complaining is gratitude. Gratitude is always about what is present and what is working. Complaining is always about what is wrong and what is missing. So, I began to do a little research. And I found that the average person complains 15 to 30 times every single day, and yet they have no awareness they're doing it. I mean, if you think about it, complaining is like bad breath. You notice it when it comes out of somebody else's mouth, but not so much when it comes out of your own. So my goal was to help people become aware of how often they complain, so that ultimately those complaints could be replaced with gratitude. Now, there's a common idea that if you do something over and over again for 21 consecutive days, it'll become a habit. So I had the temerity to challenge the people in this class to try and go 21 days in a row without complaining. But then it occurred to me, how would you know what day you're on? I mean, if your goal is to go 21 days in a row without complaining, how would you keep track? In 2006, when this all happened, everybody was wearing, in the United States, was wearing these yellow bracelets. Does anybody know what those were for, the rubber ones? Livestrong, yeah, that's exactly right. Lance Armstrong had a nonprofit for cancer, and people gave a donation and they got these yellow bracelets, and it got to be sort of a point of pride to have a bracelet. So it occurred to me that if you put a bracelet on your wrist, and every time you catch yourself complaining, no, you don't snap it, okay? You don't do violence to yourself to try and improve yourself. What you do is, your goal is to go how many days in a row without complaining? 21. So you put the bracelet on, you're on day, that's it. Soon as you catch yourself complaining, you take the bracelet off your wrist, you move it to the other wrist, and you start back over on day one. So a person who is really doing this is switching this constantly. This is not a cause bracelet. Each of you should have received one this morning when you came in. This is not a cause bracelet. This isn't, I support a complaint-free world. This is a mindfulness tool. This is something to make you aware of how often you complain. So I handed out 250 of these. That was it, 250. And immediately, my phone began to blow up with messages. People wanted these bracelets. They wanted them for their real estate office. They wanted them for their third grade class. They wanted them for their bank, their car dealership. And this was 2006. This was before smartphones. This was before Facebook. And yet people telling other people within 30 days, we had requests for 9,000 bracelets. And it just continued to grow from there on and on until, as you heard Naomi say, we are at 15 million bracelets around the world. I just had 50,000 delivered to our warehouse a couple of weeks ago. And we don't do any advertising. So, I tried to figure out how some obscure guy teaching a class in Kansas City, Missouri, would create what People magazine called a worldwide phenomenon. And I think it's two reasons. Number one, there's too much complaining in the world. If you agree, say yes. Yes. And number two, the world isn't the way we would like it to be. If you agree, say yes. Here's the thing, friends. Those two are correlated. We are so busy talking about focusing on putting our creative energy towards what is wrong, we are attracting more of what is wrong to us. So, what is a complaint? The dictionary defines complain as to express grief, pain, or discontent. So, which word here is in yellow? Express, right? Now, by its definition, a complaint must therefore be. I bring this up because I do 40 of these events a year. And invariably, when I hand out the complaint-free bracelets, some overachiever comes up to me afterwards and says, I'm going to switch my bracelet with every negative thought. You know what I say? Good luck with that. Because we think on average 45,000 thoughts a day. And you tell me, are most of the thoughts people think positive or negative? Negative. I've asked that question all over the world and the answer is always negative. You know why it's negative? We have a negativity bias. Humans have survived because it's safer to say no than it is to say yes. The thing is, in our communication, we have not evolved past that, such that complaining is the dominant mode of communication for most people. Now, in your industry especially, I want you to get this. It is not complaining to speak directly and only to the person who can resolve your issue. That is not complaining. If you're putting on an event and an exhibitor comes up to you and has a challenge or a problem, and you're the one putting on the event, if they come to you, that is not a complaint. That's a request for accountability. Now, unfortunately, when they present it, they may really sound like they're complaining, or they may come across as angry. You know why that is? Because when these adults were kids, they discovered that if they asked mom or dad for something and the answer was no, that if they whined enough or if they got angry, they got what they wanted. And unfortunately, they never grew out of it. So when you're dealing with someone who comes across whiny or aggressive, try and look at them as a wounded child. and understand that if you're the person that can solve the problem, it's a request for accountability. By the way, one of the myths about complaining, people think, well, if we're getting a lot of complaints or if we're getting complaints, we're not doing a good enough job. That's not true. Studies have actually found that the better you do, the more complaints you get. You know why? You've raised people's expectations. So don't ever think they're going to go away. Let your reviews of your events tell you how well you did. Eckhart Tolle explained this idea of speaking directly to someone. He said, complaining is not to be confused with informing someone of a mistake or a deficiency so that it can be put right. And he goes on to say, and to refrain from complaining doesn't necessarily mean putting up with bad quality or behavior. He says there is no ego in telling the waiter your soup is cold and needs to be heated up if you stick to the facts, which are always what? One more time. Facts are always neutral. How dare you serve me cold soup? That's complaining. Most complaints have a, how dare you do this to me tone. How dare you do this to me, the center of the universe? Now, I am originally from South Carolina, which is deep in the South in the United States. And my mother was a Southern lady. And if me and my two brothers were good during the week, my mother would take us out to lunch on Sundays. That was our big reward. We got to pick the restaurant. She took us to the restaurant. We could have anything we wanted. Now, being a Southern lady, my mother practiced Southern hospitality, which means you are nice to everyone all the time. And the best way to do that is never tell anybody the truth. Invariably, we would be at lunch and the waiter would come over and say, "How was your meal?" And my mother always said the same two words. "Just fine." Is everything cooked the way you want it? Just fine. You need anything? Just fine. And as soon as the waiter would walk away, my mother would look at me and my brothers and say things like, "You know, I ordered sweet tea and this is unsweet." And one time, my little brother, he became my personal hero in this moment. 7 years old, sitting at the table, server comes up, waiter checks on us, everything good. My mama, just fine, just fine. Soon as the waiter walked away, my mother looked at me and my brothers and she said, "I ordered my steak medium and this thing's about burnt." And my little brother said, "Mama, do you see a waiter outfit on me?" Who should my mother have been talking to? So my question is for you, whom should you be speaking to instead of whomever you're complaining to? Speak directly and only to the person who can resolve your issue. You know, your industry and my industry are identical. And when COVID came around, COVID really changed things for a very long time and continues to. And prior to COVID, I was hired to speak at an event in Denver, Colorado. Now, normally I get off a plane, punch up an Uber, it's waiting for me, and I go. Now, this particular event planner decided they were going to send like a mini limousine to pick me up. Fancy. And then they took me to this beautiful hotel, and the driver of the limousine said, "This is the nicest hotel in Denver." And he's right, it was beautiful. The interesting thing was, though, I had an early morning speech the next day, so I wanted to get to sleep really early. I'm lying in bed about 10:30 at night when all of a sudden, from the other side of the wall, behind my headboard, this noise starts. And the noise starts really slow and kind of quiet. And then it gets faster and louder. And the noise sounded something like this. It went, whoom, squeak, 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 whoom, squeak. It's not what you're thinking. I thought the same thing, but it went on entirely too long. No, it turns out I was on the 5th floor of the hotel. The building next door was 5 stories high, and it had one of those big exhaust fans on the top that had a rusty spot. Squeak, squeak. So what does the no complaining guy do in a situation like this? I went downstairs and spoke to them at the front desk, and I said, you're probably not aware of this, but, which is a good way to start a conversation like that, you're probably not aware of this, but, and then I explained it to them. You know what they did? They put me in the nicest suite I have stayed in anywhere in the world. I had a kitchen, a living room, and 3 bedrooms, and I slept in every one of the beds because I could. But I have to tell you, before the whole no complaining thing, I would have handled it differently. I would have called my mother. You're laughing because you do it too. Can you believe this? Best hotel in Denver. I'll show them. I'll stay in the room. That's what we do. We stay in rooms, relationships, jobs, situations where we're not happy, but we don't speak directly and only to the person who can resolve our issue. So what's wrong with complaining? That's what people often ask me. What's wrong with complaining? First of all, complaining actually costs you money. Complaining increases absenteeism and turnover in corporations. That's why long before COVID, I said complaining is a pandemic that spreads from person to person and kills an organization from within. Studies have found that organizations with a lot of complaining lose people regularly and have to replace them. But here's the worst part. Those are your best people. It's your good people who can get a job anywhere. And so they are the ones who look around and say, I don't want to be around all this negativity. And they leave, and you're stuck with what I like to call the Eeyores. Remember Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh? Well, we got rid of another one. And that's who you're stuck with. Complaining costs money. But have you noticed that complaining is a competitive sport? If you haven't, notice it when you're in a group. People always out-complain each other. I was speaking to a very large school district outside of Chicago, and one of the superintendents who had brought me in, they threw a big party like with a bunch of teachers and everything before my event. And so I'm in there, and he's taking me around and introducing me to various people. And then all of a sudden, the door opens, and in walks the beloved high school football coach. Well, he doesn't really walk. He kind of hobbles like this. And so the superintendent leaves me and walks over to him and says, Coach, what's the matter? And the coach says, it's kind of embarrassing, actually. I got up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, stubbed my toe, and the nail is black, and it hurts. As soon as he said that, another teacher said, you know, about 5 years ago, I got up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. I stubbed my toe, came down wrong, twisted my ankle, and I was on crutches for 5 weeks. Then another teacher said, I've got an uncle. He got up in the middle of the night, stubbed his toe, fell over backwards, hit his head on a coffee table, and died. What do you think everybody else did? You win. Complaining always goes in degrees of higher severity, never the other way around. Could you imagine if somebody would have said, my uncle stubbed his toe, fell over backwards, hit his head, and died, and then the coach would have said, well, I stubbed my toe and the nail is black. Everybody would have looked at him like, what is wrong with you? Don't you know how complaining works? It always goes in degrees of higher severity. People compete at complaining. One of the biggest challenges with complaining, though, is it keeps your focus on the problem. You're not looking for solutions, you're focused on the problem. One of my favorite stories that illustrates this, which you may enjoy, is 2 construction workers sit down for lunch one day. First one opens his lunchbox, looks inside and goes, oh, yuck. And his buddy says, what's wrong? And the first guy says, I got a meatloaf sandwich for lunch. And the next guy goes, what's wrong with that? First guy says, I hate meatloaf. Next day, same 2 guys sit down for lunch. First one opens his lunchbox, looks inside and goes, oh, come on. His buddy says, what's wrong? He says, I got another meatloaf sandwich. Third day, same 2 guys sit down. First one opens his lunchbox. This time, he reaches in, grabs his sandwich, crushes it, and begins to stomp about saying, I've had it. I've had it. Day in and day out, I get the same thing. I want something else. And his buddy says, why don't you ask your wife to make you something else? And the first guy, still stomping around, goes, I make my own lunch. If you get nothing else I say today, let it be an understanding you make your own lunch every day by the thoughts that you think, but more importantly, the words that you come out of your mouth. And if the words that come out of your mouth are complaints, you are drawing to you more negative experiences. So what else is wrong with complaining? Complaining actually damages your health. People who chronically complain have much higher levels of the stress hormone cortisol. Can somebody tell me what cortisol is? I just said it. Stress hormone. Sorry about that. Cortisol is the stress hormone. When you are under stress, your body is full of cortisol. You know that feeling when you're under stress? Now, what's wrong with cortisol? Cortisol causes obesity, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, heart attack, stroke. Cortisol is really bad on your body. The way I like to think of cortisol is my first car was a manual transmission with a clutch. You know what it's like when you press down a clutch and an accelerator at the same time? The engine races, but you don't go anywhere. That's what happens when you're under stress. And complaining actually does that to your body. To me, though, the most interesting study that I have read on complaining is what it does to your brain. Stanford University did a study where they took a group of people and they put them each into an MRI machine to measure their brains. Then they recruited a person to sit outside each of the MRI machines And while the person was having the brain scan, to complain to that person. They said, complain about anything you want. Complain about the weather, complain about your children, complain about your job, complain about your football team, complain about anything. Just complain. And for the first 30 minutes, the brain looked normal. But at about the 30-minute mark, the scientists noticed that the hippocampus in these people's brain would begin to shrink. So they took the study one step further. This time they put people into MRI machines, but rather than having someone else complain to them, they told them simply, complain out loud while you're sitting here. As you're lying here, rather. As you're lying here, just complain. Complain about anything. And again, at about the 30-minute mark, they noticed that the hippocampus in the person's brain began to shrink. What does the hippocampus do? The hippocampus is responsible for learning and creative thinking. So the takeaway in this is that chronic complaining makes you stupid. It literally limits your brain activity. And finally, what's wrong with complaining? It destroys relationships. I'm going to do a little impromptu study here. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand and raise them high if this is true for you. How many of you know a person who's a chronic complainer? Raise your hand high. Now, keep your hand, hold it up, hold it up, hold it up, hold it up. Keep it up if you find being around that person an energy drain. There we go. Complaining to someone lowers the energy in the relationship. Complaining to someone makes people feel less happy. It's amazing. I have been so fortunate to speak to industries of every type around the world. And what I've noticed is that at the end of the day, regardless of what you do, people often want to sit down with their spouse, their partner, their friends, whatever, have a glass of wine or a glass of tea or something like that at the end of the day, and they connect by complaining about everything that happened that day. That's their mode of connection. This was driven home for me when my daughter was 6 years old. She's now fully grown and is my business manager. But when she was 6, we were sitting at the dinner table, and she said, "How was your terrible day today, Daddy?" And I went, wow, that's what I'm teaching this child. So then we began to do something different. She, her mother, and I would talk about things we were grateful for. What went well today? What are you happy about? And it totally shifted. Complaining to someone lowers the energy in the relationship. Do you know the greatest gift you can give people in your life is the gift of your own happiness? Because then you're not a burden. Complaining about someone causes you to look for more to complain about. My daughter's mom is a retired dental assistant. She worked in dentistry for 35 years. And she was in various offices that she worked at. And one of the last offices where she worked before she retired, she started in this new office. She went to the lobby. They gave her a file. She went to ask the person to come and follow her down the hall. And as she's walking down the hall, she's thumbing through the file. And she notices that the last dental assistant who worked with her put an acronym at the bottom. What they wrote was PITA. She'd been in dentistry forever. She'd never heard of PITA. So she didn't want to look stupid and ask. A few days later, she gets another file. This one also says PITA. And for those of you who haven't figured it out yet, PITA stands for pain in the You got it. Yep. Now, the dentist noticed that morale in her practice was going down, and she began to notice these PITA things. She held a meeting and she said, no more PITA. She said, anyone is entitled to have a bad day. But if you are expecting a PITA when you're walking down the hall, when you get in the exam room, that's what you're going to find. Complaining about someone causes us to look for more to complain about. All right. So if complaining costs money, is a competitive sport, keeps our focus on the problem, damages health, and destroys relationships, why do people do it? That to me is what's fascinating. I'm not here to complain about complaining. I'm here to help you understand that people complain to get their social needs met. And I'm going to teach you that people only complain for 5 reasons. And more importantly, as soon as you leave here today, when you check your phone again or when you check your email, I'm going to help you understand specifically what the real complaint is behind the complaint, so that you can begin to turn complainers into collaborators. Does this sound good? Say yes. One more time, everybody say yes. Good. Then here's how I'm going to teach you this, because I want to make sure you know it. The great United States President Abraham Lincoln went to what is known as a blab school when he was a child. What that meant was the teacher would read something out loud, and then the students would blab it back to the teacher. So much so that even in his later life as President of the United States, Lincoln read every document out loud to make sure he took it in. Studies have found that if you say something out loud, if you hear something, say it out loud, you take it in at a deeper level, and you also teach those around you. So periodically, I'm going to ask you all to recite something that I'm going to show on the screen. But for this to work, I'm going to need everyone to participate. Is everyone willing to participate? Please respond in one strong voice, yes. Yes. Good. Now, in the United States, we have a slang word for complaining. A lot of places in the world use whinge. We use Gripe for gripe, which is interesting because in Spanish, that is actually flu. Gripe. So people, first and foremost, by the way, this is according to Dr. Robin Kowalski at Clemson University. She did her doctoral thesis on complaining, but I took her research and working with her, came up with these 5 points. So I want to hear everybody tell me in one strong voice, the G in gripe stands for? Get attention. Get attention. Talk to me. I want to talk to you, and I don't know how. I want to talk to you, and the default that I have is complain. By the way, getting attention is not a human want. This is a human need. Having traveled all over the world, you can put me in any hotel, and I can tell you whether or not it's a good hotel. You know why? Whether or not the staff speaks to me. If I pass a housekeeper in the hallway and she says, "Good morning, sir," that's a nice hotel. You know why? Because they know I need attention. By the way, this is why elevators are uncomfortable. Because we get on an elevator and we know it's just going to be a short trip and we're fine until someone else gets on the elevator. Then all of a sudden, the numbers become real interesting. It went from 9 to 8. Wonder where it's going to go now. 7. Until somebody complains. Do you think Manchester's ever going to win a game? I don't know what they're thinking. And then there's a connection. They're getting attention. Do you think it's ever going to stop raining? I don't know. I saw the animals lining up 2 by 2 outside. You've got a connection. This is a need. It's not a want. There's a show on Netflix in the United States called Magic for Humans. And this guy goes out into the world and does these elaborate events, I guess. And one of the ones that I really thought was cool, he hired 40 actors and he took them to a park. He then assigned them roles. And he said, okay, you two gentlemen, here's a chessboard. Go over that table and pretend to play chess. You, sir, here's a book. I want you to sit here and read the book. You two, you're now a couple. Here's a bottle of wine and a picnic basket and a blanket. You young people, here's a Frisbee. Go throw the Frisbee. So all these people just acted like they were hanging out in the park. And he waited until someone who did not know what was going on walked by. And he jumped up and said, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Justin Willman, and I'm going to do a magic trick, and I need a volunteer. And at that point, all the actors start coming forward, corralling this poor guy to the front. And he pretends to look around and goes, you, sir. And of course, he picks the one guy who doesn't know what's going on. Brings him down, puts him in a chair, and he says, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to make this man disappear right before your very eyes. He puts a tarp over the man, and he goes, 1, 2, 3, abracadabra, pulls the tarp off, and all of the actors, as they had been trained to do, go, where did he go? Some of them start looking under the chair. The answer is, he went nowhere. He's sitting right there. And not only that, the guy's expression is priceless because he's invisible, right? He's going like this. Because he's just been given one of the 3 great superpowers. He's invisible. He jumps up and starts going in front of people going, ha, 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 ha. He goes over to the men playing chess and starts moving their pieces around. And they act like, oh, it's a ghost. He snags Frisbees out of the air. He goes to the couple having a picnic and drinks their wine and eats their food. Having a blast. And it's so interesting because he does have a blast for about 6 minutes. And then you know what happens? He goes from nobody can see me to, oh my God, nobody can see me. He begins to panic. So much so that Justin Willman has to stop and go over and tell the guy. The whole thing's a gag. We need attention from other people. By the way, studies have found, I'll let you in on a little way to give people better attention. Studies have found, imagine this is my cell phone, that if I am having a conversation with this gentleman, your name is? Close enough for me, sorry. If you and I are talking, and if I'm just holding my phone, not even looking at it, studies have found that it comes across to him that I am not giving him my full attention. And we need that. We need that attention. So what do we do if we've got somebody constantly coming to us to complain to get attention? It's your turn to participate. I'm going to show you what the response is, and I'm going to ask you to repeat it when I say go. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, go. Let's do it one more time. 1, 2, 3, go. Whatever. What is going well with whatever? When this person comes to talk to you, if you know they're a person who just complains, to get attention, to connect, remember, then you ask them proactively, what is going well? What are you grateful about? What are you happy about? What's the best meal you've eaten in the last 24 hours? What do you love about your kids? What do you love about our industry? You want to use verbal jujitsu on these people. You need to turn the power of what they're saying against them. Don't wait for them to come up and tell you the world's worst news. You ask them proactively what is going well. Does that make sense? Say yes. Beautiful. All right. Before I change the slide, let's make sure we know the first one. The G in gripe stands for? One more time, everybody together. The G in gripe stands for? Great. Now tell me, the R in gripe stands for? Remove responsibility. People complain to be removed of responsibility. Imagine you give someone a task. It can be an employee, it can be a child, it can be anyone. You say, this is what I want done, this is when I want it done. Now, if the person does not want to do it or doesn't want to do it to the level that you would like, they're not going to look you in the face and say, no. So what they do is complain about all the circumstances surrounding your request. And they usually say something like this, you know, I would love to do that, but. But is an erasure word. It erases everything that came up before it. I would love to do that, but, and then they name something that's in their way. They complain about it. Now, I don't know about you, but I try to be a nice person. So if I give somebody a task and they complain about a situation that's impeding their progress, I try and help them resolve it. The problem is, if you resolve that first problem, are they done? Yes or no? No, they got tons more they can complain about to ultimately get you to let them off the hook. I like to say they rationalize. They tell rational lies until you let them off the hook. And what you want to do is keep them on the hook. And you don't want to be petty, and you don't want to be mean, and you don't want to be dismissive. So I'm going to show you what you say, and when I say go, I want to hear everybody read it aloud. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, go. One more time, stress the underlined word. 1, 2, 3, go. How might who do it? Meaning not? Exactly. If it were possible, how might you do it? If it were possible, how might you do it? This works, but only 100% of the time. So I strongly recommend you give it a try. Just simply keep asking. If it were possible, how might you do it? I have done this with people, and they never say something like, you're using one of your techniques on me, aren't you? No, they don't even notice. You just keep bringing it back to them. So, I'm about to change the slide. I need to know we all know the first 2 letters. So everybody tell me, the G in gripe stands for? Great. The R in gripe stands for? Yes, remove responsibility. And the I in gripe stands for? Do you know why it's inspire envy? Because brag doesn't begin with an I, so it wouldn't fit. But it literally means brag. People complain to brag. Having been fortunate to speak all over the world, I've never been to a country where braggarts are considered cool. People who brag are rude. People who brag about their good fortune are rude. But you can complain about your good fortune and accomplish the same thing. I have a good friend that we started 14 years ago getting together every Thursday morning for coffee. And then when I moved, now we do it virtually. So we still meet every Thursday morning. But we were in this coffee shop, and my friend has done really well in life. and he just bought $1 million boat. And I congratulated him on the boat, thought that was wonderful. And then, I don't know, maybe a month after he bought it, we're sitting there in the coffee shop, and we see two friends about to come in the coffee shop. And so my buddy, as they pass, leans back in his chair and says, "You know, Will, when you spend $1 million on a boat, you think it would come with a better trailer." So what do you think the two friends walking by? "Oh, you got $1 million boat." And then a few weeks after that, we're sitting there, and he reaches into his pocket and pulls out a boat key. Who takes a boat key to a coffee shop? This was premeditated. Not only that, I wondered how many weeks he'd been carrying this key, and he waited until another friend walked by our table, and he said, "You know, Will, when you spend $1 million on a boat, you think the key would come with one of those little floats attached." And the guy goes, "Oh." People complain to brag. People complain to inspire envy. And you know something interesting? We don't complain about people who are like us. We complain about people who aren't like us. And if you don't believe me, test it when you're driving. I used to have an assistant that would drive me to the airport, which was great, but we have two very different driving styles. I tend to drive just slow enough not to get a speeding ticket. And in my opinion, she drove just fast enough not to get a parking ticket. She was driving me to the airport one time, and I'm thinking, "Would you please speed up? Gum wrappers are passing us." And then when I would drive, claw marks in the dashboard. It's interesting, I live south of Miami, Florida now, and there are two types of drivers in Miami. There are the elderly retired people who have moved to Florida from everywhere else in the United States to what Robin Williams called God's waiting room. And then there are the young people who grew up on Grand Theft Auto. The elderly people are in no hurry to get anywhere and will take any lane. The young people drive by like they're trying to win a video game. So you've got the fast and the furious up against the dazed and confused. And they both describe the other person the same way. Idiot. Exactly. It's worldwide. Idiot. We complain to make ourselves seem superior to other people. And people do this at work. People complain at work. Let's say you've got a meeting scheduled, 8 o'clock in the morning. Everybody's there, except one person, right? Someone who's chronically late. And let's say one of your people, Tom, says, "Well, we could start, but I see that Julie is late as usual." And everybody goes, "Ha, ha, 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 ha," right? Tom is not telling you Julie is late so that you'll know she's late. You can see that. Tom is telling you he's on time. He's bragging. He's making what is called an invidious comparison with someone else. It is a negative comparison to someone else to try and elevate his status. So this is what you want to do in a situation like that. Read this out loud. 1, 2, 3, go. Good energy, thank you. Compliment the opposite. So if someone at work complains about someone else, what you want to say is, in this case, Tom says, "Well, we could start, but Julie's late." What you want to do is look at Tom and say, "You know what I appreciate about you, Tom? You're always on time." If one of your kids complains about another one, "He doesn't clean up his room." You know what I appreciate about you? You always keep your room neat. This is called compliment the opposite, all right? So before I change the slide, let's make sure we got it. Everyone. The G in gripe stands for get attention. The R in gripe stands for the I in gripe stands for beautiful. And the P stands for power. Nothing gets people excited and following someone else or following a movement faster than complaints. Most people are neutral about most situations. They simply are until someone else comes up and complains to them. And then all of a sudden they're like, yeah, that's right. There's another show on Netflix called The Social Dilemma. And this is a documentary in which they brought in people whose jobs were to build the platform, the social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, you name it. They were Snapchat. They had executives, former executives, high-level people, and they brought them in and interviewed them, and they said, okay, if your goal is to increase the platform, which means more people, longer period of time. If that is your goal, how do you do it? And they all said some version of, we draw them in with their interests. You like surfboarding? We're going to show you surfboarding. You like horses? We're going to show you horses. But then slowly we're going to start to recommend little things that might upset you. Something political, something social, something that will upset you. And what they found is if they can hook you into that upset spiral, you will watch or attend longer and more often. I call this enrage and engage. If you can enrage someone, you can engage them. Social media based on complaining. In the United States, the news media is based on complaining. A friend of mine is a TV anchor in Kansas City, Missouri, and she said she gets so tired of reading the things that her producers write, taking them into a commercial break, because it'll say silly things like, is your toaster trying to kill you? Find out when we come back. And then you watch, and the answer is nope. But they got you to watch. Enrage and engage. In the United States, I can tell you this, all politics is based on complaining. If you don't have a complaint, you don't have a campaign. Could you imagine if I'm running for Senate in Florida, which I'm not, but if I were and this was my campaign? Hi, I'm Will Bowen, and I want you to know I'm running for Senate right here in the great state of Florida. And I want you to know I believe that everybody in Washington is doing a great job. And I want you to send me up there so we can keep things just the way they are. Vote Will Bowen for status quo. Am I getting elected, yes or no? No, you got to say their skunks are terrible. You got to send me up there to fix it. All politics is based on complaining. Now, power. How do people complain for power in a work environment? This is interesting. It's usually one or another prima donna complaining about another prima donna to build an alliance at work. They're just building an alliance. So, they're complaining for power, and they want to buy your allegiance, your power, for the price of a complaint. You don't want to get involved, so this is what you say. Please read this when I say go. 1, 2, 3, go. The two of who? Meaning not? Exactly. Sounds like the two of you have a lot to talk about. And just keep saying that. And if they keep coming to you, you can say, it sounds like the two of you have a lot to talk about, and I'll be happy to schedule a meeting. Just don't get involved. Does this make sense? Say yes. That was underwhelming. Let's try that again. Does this make sense? Say yes. Nice. All right. Keep that same energy. Tell me, we're down to our last letter. The G in gripe stands for? The R in gripe stands for? The I in gripe stands for? Yes. The P in gripe stands for? And the E stands for? Excuse poor performance. Now, the fascinating thing about this is, excuse poor performance is the past tense of remove responsibility. With remove responsibility, you give somebody a task, they don't want to do it or they don't want to do a good job, so they complain about the circumstances, so you let them off before they even try. Now, in excuse poor performance, you've given them a task and they've failed. And then they want you to not blame them, they want you to blame the circumstances, so they complain about the circumstances so that you won't hold them accountable. So what do you do if you've got somebody complaining to excuse their poor performance? You want to keep them on the hook, so this is what you say. Everybody read it when I say go. 1, 2, 3, go. How do you plan to improve? When? You know why you say next time? Because nobody's defensive about next time. If you start trying to rehash why didn't you think about that? Why didn't you plan for that? Didn't you know that was a possibility? They get defensive. They close up. And you can't change it anyway. So you want to just keep asking, how do you plan to improve next time? All right, time for our test. Everybody look at me, please. Strong voices. The G in gripe stands for? Yes. The R in gripe stands for? The I in gripe stands for? The P stands for? And the E stands for? Yes. Give yourselves a round of applause. You've got it. That's awesome. So as you know, I have brought each one of you a complaint-free bracelet, so that you can take the complaint-free challenge, at least while you're here. Now, I warn you, because I told you people complain 15 to 30 times a day, this is how it typically goes. You're on day 1, then you're on day 1, then day 1, 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 day 2, day 1, because this is a process. It takes the average person 4 to 8 months to complete this. And before you ask, the answer is yes. We've had thousands of people in 106 countries who have made it 21 days in a row without complaining. So just try it while you're here. If you catch yourself complaining, switch your bracelet, but don't be a bracelet cop. If you hear somebody else complain, don't say something like, well, you know, Elizabeth, I think you might need to move that bracelet. Unless you move yours first, because you're complaining about their complaining. So I want to invite you to take the challenge while you're here. I'm going to close with the 3 most common questions people ask me. The third most common is, how do we get more of these bracelets? We want our group to take the challenge. We want, etc. Your bracelet says acomplaintfreeworld.org. If you will go there, we've got programs for businesses, families, relationships. Just check it out, acomplaintfreeworld.org. The second most common question people ask is, how do we get you? We want to bring you in to speak. Again, go to acomplaintfreeworld.org and click on Speaking. There's a link at the top. But I have to tell you, even though it was a long time ago, to this day, number 1 question people ask me, what is Oprah like? This was back when I still had the cul-de-sac right here. You know, it's funny, she's the same on camera as she is off camera. Just a wonderful, joyous person to talk to and funny. She's really funny. But the interesting thing is, right after I finished this segment with her and the light went off on the camera, she leaned over and she patted me on the arm and she said, you know, Will, I have nothing to complain about. And you know what I thought? Of course not. You're Oprah Winfrey, for goodness sake. What are you going to complain about? You're one of the richest, most powerful people alive. And my poker face did not work. I literally rolled my eyes at Oprah like, yeah, of course. And she said, no, you missed the point. Oprah said, it's not that I have everything that I have, and that's why I don't complain. Oprah said, I don't complain, and that's why I have everything that I have. You see, Oprah gets that she makes her own lunch, and she makes it every day with intention and integrity, and you have that same power. So make a magnificent buffet and share it with our world. Thank you all so much for your kind attention. It's been an honor. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all.
No more, no more complaining people. Their lives are changing. We're flying high, creating a complaint-free world. No more, no more complaining people. Their lives are changing. We're flying high, creating a complaint-free world. No more, no more.
Thank you so much, Will, for this brilliant speech. I think we've all learned a lot for it and got some new insights. I will be trying the 21-day challenge, definitely. So we would like to thank all of the sponsors for powering the speaker. It's powered by Clemageran Expositions, Jim, the Well Group, EF Exhibitions Frightening, Expotrans, GIS and Swiss Expo. Thank you very much.
John, well, I must say, I know what I'm gonna do, but I think I'm gonna change this bracelet quite a lot. But let's see how it goes. It got me thinking. We did a little exercise at the winter seminar, a little role playing, and it got me thinking regarding the key points that Will mentioned. At first, it's the general worker attending with a complaint and the exhibitor. Then it's a manager attending. Then next in line, you get the CEO also involved, and I think the finance lady is also in there in the mix as well. And the point is, there's one person that can resolve the issue. Because I think at the end of the day, it's a whole party going on, and the exhibitor right next to you, he's bringing his 2 beers because he thinks this is the party. It can be resolved with one person, and I think with all the notes that Will has mentioned, we can make it work. And I mean, give it another round of applause for Will.